People who watch security cameras for a living. What creepy things have you tried to forget? Worked as a harbor master a while ago. Had to check the marina's cameras after a boat was abandoned at our docks. I was looking for the owner. I looked on the tape from the boat's first night in the marina. The man who had sailed the boat in was standing on the end of his boat for 2 hours, barely moving. Then at 1:30 a.m. he just walked off the back and dropped into the water. He never came back up. Never found his body. Freaky. I used to do IT support for a charity that supplied housing and support for homeless people. A large proportion also had mental health issues, so there were a fair amount of interesting events that happened. Being in IT, I avoided experiencing most of it firsthand, though I was threatened with being stabbed on about my 3rd day. Anyway, I come in one Monday, and there's an email labeled urgent, saying there was an incident at the stairwell of one of the properties on Sunday night, and could I pull the relevant CCTV footage and put it on a DVD. I had to do this fairly frequently. I skip through the footage, find the incident, usually a fight or blatant drug dealing, and burn it to DVD for the police. The email never mentioned what the incident was, so I skip through the footage, and watch as a clearly very agitated man ties a rope around a stair rail at the top of the stairs. Then his neck, looks over the rail and then just casually tips forward over it. The rope flipped him round, and he dangled there twitching for far too long, before he just stopped. So yeah, that was a fun Monday. Wasn't a security officer, but I worked at a 24/7 gas station for a while. One night my coworker accidentally killed himself while at work, and I made the mistake of watching the footage. He went to the back of the store with a bag of drugs, probably cocaine, snorted it and started acting funny for about 10 minutes. He then sits in the back office and gets fidgety/thrashing around until finally he just goes limp in the chair. He had died of a heart attack and sat there for 5 hours before anybody came in, thought the absence of an employee was strange, and called the cops. It was really weird seeing people come in and act all pissy for the lack of service. They'd just leave thinking someone was lazy, but nah, dude was dead. Saw a chicken walk up the side of a tree at 2 a.m. Was watching CCTV footage of a parking deck, and on the 9th level there's this guy sitting in the middle of the deck, banging his head on one of the pillars. All of a sudden the guy just stops, and runs to the edge. Without stopping or jumping, he flings himself over the edge. I immediately called dispatch and told them what had happened. Few days later I was offered counseling for those events. Was a security coordinator for a large electric company and had access to like 80+ facilities CCTV infrastructures. Was doing maintenance check on some random train station at like 3 a.m. Panned a camera as far to the right as possible to check that it was functioning, and this dude was on all fours eating a deer in the middle of the tracks. Watched him for like 10 minutes and went to get the other guy on shift. When I came back, the dude was gone. Rewound it, and the dude stopped munching on the carcass, wiped the gore off his face, and walked into the woods like he didn't have a care in the world. I work in a retail store, and for a while I worked security here. Watching the security cameras wasn't technically my job, but we were consistently short-handed in that department and the manager was grooming me for promotion, so I got to fill in and watch the cameras occasionally. One day when we were reviewing footage from overnights, we saw this teenager calmly set down a shopping basket, take off his hat and glasses, and just charge at a wall. Hit it head on. He did this 2 more times. When he was done, his face was a bloody mess, and he put his hat and glasses back on and just left. Weirded me right the hell out. Mostly lots of sex. I've had to turn on the microphone and tell them to stop it or they'll be thrown out of the college gym. I used to work loss prevention for a big box store. We had a lady get arrested for public indecency and I was asked to investigate. I had to follow her backwards from the point of arrest and it was a trip to say the least. She arrived at the store swerving and nearly hitting several cars. She entered the store with 2 young children, both of whom are mentally handicapped. That lady literally dragged those kids around the store, slapping them and tugging at their ears' collars if they didn't obey. At some point she just abandons them in the clothing section, walks through the back doors, to the break area, and I'm assuming she thought it was the bathroom because she proceeds to pull down her pants and sits all over the fire exit door. She pulls her pants up, without wiping mind you, and goes back to the floor like nothing happened. Someone saw what she did and followed her. Luckily there's an officer in the store at the time and quickly approaches her when the associate tells him what she did. Needless to say, she was definitely high and or drunk and was arrested. The scary part is, she did not mention those kids not one time. It wasn't until I reviewed the tape that I saw they were just still waiting by the shopping cart, completely oblivious and afraid to move. Child Services was later called, and I still think about those kids often. Breaks my heart to think about the bullshit those kids must still be going through. Not for a living, but I've had security cameras for the last 10 years at my house. A guy was shot 7 times in front of my house, but I only caught the audio. I've had random people walk around the front of the house looking for anything to steal and actually stealing it several times. Countless instances where people come up to break into my car until they realize the motion light kicks on and we have cameras. Most of the time people breaking into cars have a large tool bag over their shoulder. It's so amazing about the number of times people come up to my house doing weird shit. If I didn't have the cameras I wouldn't know about hardly any of the shit. One pro tip for anyone installing cameras: make sure you put lots of signs saying that there is video surveillance, otherwise you just end up with a lot of footage of people stealing stuff. Not security cameras per se, but I had a SOC type job monitoring corporate internet usage. We had an image inspector watching people's web traffic, and it would throw up questionable images that someone on the network downloaded onto the big SOC screen. Being a medical related company, there were a lot of breast cancer type traffic that would throw off the porn detectors, which is why we watched in real-ish time. One time I was sitting at the desk overnight. Nobody should have been working, and suddenly the SOC screen turned into a wall of graphic child porn. Some genius took his laptop home, VPN'd into work, and started browsing so as to avoid being caught by his ISP. He's in prison now. This incident is a large part of why I no longer do that kind of work, or corporate forensics. They make it sound like it's all catching hackers and espionage, but in reality, it's mostly looking at other people's porn. I used to do IT support for a company that had a lot of heavy machinery moving around inside a big warehouse type area. This giant front-end loader would scoop up material and dump it into a hopper. Along the sides of the floor were these huge concrete barriers. I've heard them called Jersey barriers and mafia blocks, but they are about 10 feet tall, and this one guy's life was ended when the front-end loader inadvertently scooped the base of the barrier and landed on one of 2 guys walking shoulder to shoulder through the plant. I was tasked to review the footage, then make copies. 6 of them, to be exact. And then ensure that the footage worked and was self-executable and able to be run from a USB stick. So I had to watch the footage of this guy get killed over a dozen times. I too was offered counseling for just watching the video. I used to do asset protection for a Walmart in a very heroin-addicted area. The creepiest thing was seeing how fast someone would go from completely normal to absolutely out of it in the span of a year because of the drug. You could build a timeline of their demise through CCTV pictures and video. One man in particular really stood out to me. The first time I apprehended him he was very polite and intelligent, just stealing to get his fix. A year later and the 4th time I caught him he was basically a shell of a man. He tried running from me and I looked him right in the eyes and said, "I know you, Gary last name. Please don't run." The look on his face of someone knowing him who he couldn't even remember will always stay with me. I was working at pub in Sydney and watching the CCTV when I saw a guy continually cross and uncross his legs while playing a poker slot machine. After a few minutes he walked to a corner of the room, took a sit and proceeded to go back to playing his machine. Talk about being addicted. Not a job, but my SO and I have the owlet monitor for our infant looking at his crib and room. It's set up like CCTV and it's creepy to begin with. I wake up at 2 a.m. and I go check on him and I go back to bed. Once in bed I get on my phone to view the monitor just for reassurance, and I see 2 light dots like eyes in night vision in the window of his room. I first sit my pants and I go in the room to check everything out. I can't see anything outside, so I turn on the monitor again and don't see the dots anymore, so I think it could be a dog or something. I go back to bed and wake up again an hour later to check the monitor and the dots are facing there again, so I grab a pistol and go outside around his room and check the spot by the window, really ready to have to pull the trigger. Adrenaline adrenaline is on full blast. I don't find or see anything but the monkey grass has been mashed down by that window like something sat there for a while. I set up a sleeping bag in my son's room after that for a couple nights, and I checked the monitors so I could see what the night vision caught, but I never saw those lights again. I'm super thankful it was just that, but I was scared. Edit. I am usually skeptical about stuff like this. I considered lights and stuff, and I hope it was an animal, not a person, facing messed up person. But my son is now 6 months. This happened when he was 4 months old, and the camera has been there since we brought him home. The whole time it's been up. I've never seen that, and I don't live by traffic lights and no street lamp is on that side of the house. I seriously almost lost bladder control when I saw them again, same spot just an hour later, but when I went in his room and looked at my phone I just saw me and him and black window. It freaked me out so much I prepared to defend my family, but he's 6 months now and I've never seen it again. So hopefully an animal. Not for a living, but we had security cameras installed on the property whilst we were living in South Africa. We had a monitor set up next to the bed so we could see what was happening on the 4 cameras without having to get up out of bed. One night we heard something, so we turn on the monitor and see nothing unusual. I'm ready to go back to sleep, but my partner thinks something is off about one of the cameras. Does this camera look like it's pointing in a different direction slightly? She asks. No, same as always, and it's back to bed for me. She isn't convinced, so she starts watching the recordings. True enough, footage of some dude prowling around on the property, and the camera catches him adjusting it. The terrifying bit, the way his face looked beneath the balaclava. Murder mask is what my SO called it. Pretty creepy sit. I used to work IT at a university, and last Easter we had a break-in. We found the footage of the guy going in at 2 p.m., leaving at around 3, and not really taking anything. Fast forward to 7 p.m. and the guy comes back in and is walking around the auditorium till 6 a.m. the next morning. In the time he proceeded to strip into his underwear, steal and wear a mask the Japanese exchange students made for the teacher, and smoke a shit-ton. He managed to steal 6 full bags of random items. We've dubbed him as the Jack-Off Bandit. I review the security cameras around my office building. The cameras only monitor the outside of the building. We have signs posted everywhere stating cameras are watching. You get accustomed to certain movement patterns and activation of cameras, so I don't have to review the whole day's activity, just the parts that show things out of the ordinary. For a while, homeless people were using an R behind landscaping to kick back and smoke drugs, marijuana, heroin off oil, glass meth pipes, you name it. It's all in full view of one of the cameras. Watched a few drug sales there too. However, the most disturbing by far was the sex. Basically, guys would take the homeless women to that area and do any number of weird and wonderful things. The weirdest of all was when some dude lay on the ground and a drug-slinging homeless woman sat on a bench looking at her phone. He slipped off her flip-flop and started sucking off her toes. He took short breaks intermittently to hit a glass meth pipe, then went back to work on the toes. This went on for about 45 minutes. Then they left. We systematically found almost all the homeless porn stars during the day and told them our place has cameras and not to come back. Things have been quiet for a few years now. When I worked as a security officer, it was my first week on the job. I watched my boss and another officer try to talk a guy off of the top of our parking structure. Didn't work. Watched him jump off and land next to an employee who was coming in for her shift. Guy hit the ground so hard it exploded the belt right off of his pants. I will never forget watching that. My time to shine. My first job out of college was working for a big security company. Think worldwide big. I was doing electrical engineering and security system design for them. One of the first assignments I had was assisting in writing a report about a security system for a nuclear storage facility we had designed that had been infiltrated by nuns. No joke. Basically, the facility got invaded by octogenarian nuns who started covering the nuclear storage facility in blood they had conveniently provided in water bottles. The footage was jarring in quite a few ways. I was still new to the company, so I wasn't part of the team that had made the original designs for the facility, but for training purposes they still had me help writing the report and reviewing the system to learn about what went wrong. Essentially, the site had either turned off, ignored most of the security systems as they were getting a lot of nuisance alarms, squirrels, deer, etc. The nuns were anti-nuclear protesters that spent a few hours roaming around the complex painting buildings in their own blood. It was terrible. terrifying for me in the sense where that such an important and dangerous site was infiltrated by amateurs so easily, and also because nuns really creep me the fuck out.